As much as we love filming and talking and reviewing and using like the best peak sort of flagship smartphones, there's nothing we love more than a good value for money proposition when it comes to tech. And very few companies beat Redmi. In fact, very few companies actually beat the Redmi Note series. And this year we have the Redmi Note 14 Pro Plus. Now this is an import via AliExpress, which we will put in the link in description if you wanted to buy one, and you can use it globally. It's factory unlocked. And as we'll show you later in this review, we have all the Google services on here. Now this phone costs less than $400, euros or pounds. And for that, you get some insanely great spec, which kind of emphasizes why we love reviewing mid-range smartphones. 6.67 inch, 120 Hz, AMOLED display with 68 billion colors. You get 90 watts of wired charging, and then a 6,200 milliamp hour battery. But the Redmi Note 14 Pro Plus is very unique because it does one thing different than what's currently been the trend, and that relates to the design. The design of the 14 Pro Plus is a bit of a break from what has currently been the trend when it comes to smartphones, and that is in the form of more flatter, boxier shape. The 14 Pro Plus, as you can see from the side profile here and our hands on, is actually curved, which makes it much nicer to hold in hand, and it contours naturally against the way your thumb is here as well. So you get a much more natural grip. Generally though, it is, as you'd expect, a quite large phone, curved front display, which is kind of the norm with a lot of phones that come out of sort of Xiaomi, etc. They haven't done away with that. They're still sticking to curved displays, which you could be a fan or not. We prefer flat. And then generally, the phone is very, very well built and looks really, really nice. It's an aluminium frame all over, and then you got your USB-C port and your SIM tray at the bottom. And then on the rear, yeah, that's kind of the main attraction of the 14 Pro Plus, which we'll get to later. But there's other elements of the 14 Pro Plus that we want to talk about, and that relates to performance. Snapdragon 7S Gen 3 powers the 14 Pro Plus, which makes it a bit of a mid to high end, I guess, smartphone. It's not an 8S Gen 3, which would probably make it just a bit top tier. But when you're looking at performance, let's talk about some other specs. So you can get 12 gig of RAM or 16 gig of RAM with your two options, and then 256 or 512. 16 512 comes as a combo. You can't do 12 512 if you wanted to. Then let's shift across and talk about gaming. Performance in general here is actually pretty good. You do get dedicated gaming modes as well, which allow it to run at a much smoother frame rate. And graphically, again, if you download those additional assets like we have here on Call of Duty, the game runs, just as you'd expect, very, very well. If we shift across from that to things like OS performance, again, 120 Hz panel, so what you're browsing, what you're scrolling, what you're interacting is super, super smooth. This does run Hyper OS as well. And on the OS front, 3 years worth of software updates, which we'll touch on that later in the review and how we think about that in particular. But generally the OS is great, perfectly optimized for this processor and the performance within the 14 Pro Plus. Then let's move on to other elements. There are AI features built into this, but as I said earlier, this is an import, so we can't actually use any of those here in the UK just right now because they are actually all in Chinese language, which, you know, as much as we are pretty techie, we're not going to be able to decipher what that actually means, unfortunately. Battery life, as we mentioned earlier, 6,200 milliamp hours, so you're going to get a very, very long battery life here. So things like performance in video, if you're watching back a ton of content, you could do that for a long period of time. And then quickly, let's show you some benchmark results here that show you the performance of the 7S Gen 3, which shows that this is sort of that mid to high level processor, just as you'd expect. Now, the one thing earlier we touched on when we talked about design was the cameras. Now let's talk about those. Housed within that pretty large module, you get a 50 megapixel wide, 50 megapixel telephoto, 8 megapixel ultra wide, that makes it the triple camera array, as well as your LED flash. And then the front, you get a 20 megapixel front facing camera. The rear will record at 4K, the front only capped at 1080p, which is a bit of a shame. And generally actually performance of the cameras as a whole are actually pretty good. So we spent a good full 24 hours in Wembley Stadium during the NFL to actually use this phone and this phone only to take calls, take messages, but primarily to use it for photos and videos. And as you can see, it is quite saturated, the color. It is overly bright. This was actually quite a gray, gloomy, rainy day, which meant it added a lot of contrast and color to a lot of the photos and a lot of the videos. Is that a bad thing? That's your take. A lot of people prefer it to look overly bright than you do not. One thing I would say when it comes to things like night mode, it does overly brighten even a darker scene. So these photos here in night mode are all taken sort of after sunset. So I'd say about 7:30, 8:45-ish. And it does make them a lot more vibrant and add a sky that isn't actually blue or gray, but it makes it look a lot brighter than it actually is. Video performance, again, 4K 30 looks very, very good for what this is. Don't forget, while you're factoring and seeing all these photos and imagery, this is a $400 smartphone. So the Xiaomi 14 Pro Plus has a lot of good and bad points. And to be honest, the only negative things that we would say that we can see from the Pro Plus is the 1080p front-facing camera, which is a bit of a shame. With our box in particular, now this won't be the case for Europe as far as I'm aware, we did actually get a supporting charger that actually allowed it to charge at 90 watts, which is amazing. But I believe from what I read online, that may not be the case when it does release in Europe at the end of this year or early next year. One more sticking point. This only gets 3 years worth of software updates. And you're probably thinking, that's not a bad thing. Technically it isn't, but it also is. Samsung, one of the main competitors to Xiaomi globally, has actually announced a lot of their mid-range smartphones, something like the A55, A56, are actually getting 5+ years of software support. So that, I think, would be a negative against the 14 Pro Plus. But on the flip side, the great things: design, feel, fit, finish, all great. Software runs very, very well. It looks fantastic. Performance is great as well. You get a ton of value for money out of box as well, which is amazing. Things like cases, etc. as well. So it adds more value. The AI features, of course, when they go live, they'll enhance the experience of the 14 Pro Plus even more. So there's tons to love. Smaller bits that I'd say are not great points, but overall, our impression of the Xiaomi 14 Pro Plus by Redmi has been incredibly positive. And that's our review of the 14 Pro Plus. Thank you so much for watching. Till the next one, as always, we out.